Welcome back to the After Hours podcast. I'm your host, Jack. This is episode 10. And on tonight's episode, I will be talking about misconceptions about bourbon. So this one's going to be fun. I'm going to try not to rant too much. This one's going to be a lot of facts and not just me being pissy, although I may be pissy anyway, but this one will entail some facts. So yes, I have done some research because I'm not going to bullshit you and pretend that I know something that I don't know or that my opinion is what really matters. So that's what we're going to talk about tonight. It should be fun. Basically just getting back to the basics. And there's a reason for that, right? So I always talk a lot about bourbon with other people, and it's primarily because I'm traveling and stuff. And, you know, in my circles of people that sell the stuff you walk on, I don't see a lot of them often. So when I do see them, you know, we're talking about that. They follow my social media stuff. They'll ask opinions. We'll just talk, whatever the case may be. Or when I'm visiting different states and see friends that I don't get to see all the time, you know, we'll talk about the goings on of bourbon and different bottles of bourbon. But when I talk to strangers, there are a whole lot of people that are drinking bourbon or what they consider bourbon, I guess. And I mean that it is bourbon, but some of those heritage bottles, if you call them, from, you know, the onset, to me, yeah, whatever. But so the thing is, they don't know how the shit's made. They know very little about it, and that's okay. It's not to say that you should, but if you're having a conversation about it, yeah, maybe don't talk like you know if you don't know. It's okay just to drink and not know, but because you don't have to know how to piece together an engine to drive a truck, but don't talk like you are a mechanic if you don't know how to do that. And again, it's not to trash anybody like that. This episode is more about there's so much bullshit, or has been, marketing, the half-truths, old wives' tales from way back in the day that have just been passed down along the way. It's kind of like that. What's that? The game Telephone, where you tell somebody and then they tell somebody and then they tell somebody. By the time you get to the end of the story, it's nothing about what it was that was stated first. So the purpose of this After Hours is merely to clear up some of the half-truths, lies, whatever the case, bullshit that maybe you've heard. So tonight we are going to make bourbon. Now, not literally. I don't need the ATF fucking knocking on my door because they found out that I'm making bourbon. So don't be calling the popo on me. Don't be swatting me or anything. I'm not really making it. But theoretically, we're going to do a little walkthrough of some of the finer points of bourbon, and hopefully that'll clear up some of the misconceptions along the way. Again, we're not digging down and harvesting corn and mashing it and doing all that stuff, but we're just going to talk about some of the stuff. So I'm not live as usual someday, but I'm not. So if you're getting ready to watch this, it's exciting. Call your friends, tell them to join you. However, you guys can do it over FaceTime, have them come to your house, go to their house, however you want to do it. But tell your friends. We need more audience. Pour 2 fingers any way you like it. I don't give a shit what you put in it. Fire up a stogie if you want to. Smoke whatever you want, although you shouldn't. And stay for a while because it's After Hours. So, bourbon has to be made in Kentucky, right? That's one of the biggest ones I always hear. And I understand why people think that. But that's been one of those long things that have trailed on forever. And I think a lot of it stemmed from, maybe it's from the Tennessee whiskey thing, which has nothing to do with it, but people just assumed, well, has to be made in Kentucky because Tennessee whiskey has to be made in Tennessee, but it's not the case. So the U.S. law, because bourbon is regulated by law, states that it can be made anywhere in the United States. Okay. Now, truth be told, over 90% of it is made in Kentucky, and mostly because that's where it started. They've got an excellent climate for it, but virtually every state now has some sort of bourbon distilling in some capacity going on. So, first myth, it does not have to be made in Kentucky. It is made from corn, okay, mostly. And if you know, it has to be at least 51% corn. Now, it can certainly be more than that. And more is not always better. And I say that because a few weeks back, it's probably even been a month or so now, I was traveling. I was in Indiana and I went to a distillery with my buddies. And they took me to this newer place. And they, being the distillery, it's a winery and a distillery, but they had bourbon. And we started talking to their guy, and he said it was, let me think if I got this right, 18 months. It had only been aged for, it was less than 2 years, 18 months. And then there's more to the years. We'll get into that. But so this was a very virgin bourbon. I do not like the low ages. Anything under 4 years, to me, my palate just doesn't agree. But this one was 90, high 90, mid 90% corn mash bill. For me, no bueno. And that's why I say more corn is not always better. Now, a lot of them have a lot more than 51%. But it's that other 49% that really gives it the character, and that's where the flavor is coming from. Not that 49% provides the flavor, but it's the recipe of that mash bill. It's how much of the rye or wheat or malted barley gets combined with whatever that percentage of corn is over 51% or at 51%. But that is what makes it so fantastic. And that's why I've talked several times about Four Roses. They actually have, I think, 10 different mash bills that they tweak and combine and do stuff with to actually end up with all of their different recipes. And that's why you can get like 10 different Four Roses single barrels. I mean, it's just like cooking. It's like grandma's cooking, right? Your grandma may be a great cook. Mine may cook the exact same. Mine aren't alive anymore, but they were great cooks. And they could cook the exact same thing, right? But they all use different recipes, so it all tastes different, but good. So that 49%, depending on what they put in that, and again, whatever percentage it is, as long as it's 51% corn. Dramatically, it makes all the difference in the world. One of those things is that bourbon comes out of the pot still brown, and that's not the case. It's essentially clear. It's cloudy and a little bit milky because of all the stuff in it, but it's basically clear because the color, along with the flavor and everything else, is actually coming from the barrel, which is a beautiful, beautiful thing. And if you know anything about bourbon, it has to be aged in new charred oak containers per law. Now, most of it is done in barrels for obvious reasons, but it could be a large oak vat or box or whatever if you were so inclined to do it. And I think there are some like craft distilleries that do some unique stuff, but the law says it has to be new charred oak container. And again, most of the times it's barrels, and they can only use the barrel one time. After that, they usually will sell it to other companies who store scotch, whiskey, tequila, barbecue sauce, anything like that. Maybe even honey, maple syrup. So they sell them, and then they sell them to guys like me or guys and gals like you who may want to own your own barrel, who may want to have the staves, any variety of decorative reasons that they'll sell those. Now, we talked a little bit about aging earlier. So bourbon itself doesn't have a federal minimum age that it has to be aged at. So that's not one of the restrictions, but a straight bourbon, and this is getting, a little bit scientific for you. I mean, I don't like to be scientific. I just want to drink my bourbon, but you need to understand there are some differences. So some bottles may say bourbon. Some say straight bourbon. Some have ages on them. Some don't. So what the law says is a straight bourbon has to be aged at least 2 years. And if it's under 4 years, it has to be age stated on the bottle. So if it's not a 4-year, it will say however many years and months. If it's over 4 years, it doesn't have to say anything. Now, why do some still age state it? Because that stuff is better because it's been aged longer. So they want you to know that Eagle Rare 10 was aged for 10 years. They didn't have to say that. But as we know, what has happened over the years, you slap a higher number on it like that, it becomes very fucking rare and expensive. So that's the thing with aging. There is a distinction between bourbon and straight bourbon. And that is it. Those are the only aging requirements. And some people assuming, talking about age, that an older bourbon is automatically better. Now, in theory, we hope that is the case. For example, last week I did my first blind taste test for myself between the Elijah Craig 18-year and the 15-year. I thought I would like the 15-year better, even though it's 3 years younger, because it was a higher proof. My palate said, nope, I still like the 18-year. Now, I don't know that it was because it's 3 years older, because they were both very good. Another example, earlier this year when I was in Vegas, I was at 1923 Prohibition Bar. I absolutely love that speakeasy bar. in the shops of Mandalay Bay. And I was trying some expensive pours because I knew I was never going to buy the bottle. And I tried Whistle Pig 18 and Whistle Pig 15. And in that experiment, I actually liked the 15-year a lot better from a flavor standpoint. So just because it's older doesn't mean it's better. There's a lot of things that factor into that. But generally speaking, most of those older ones are pretty good. Also, one of the myths is about proofs. Now, I like a higher proof. I think the highest proof I've had so far is only 132, 134, something along those lines. My buddy Chris in Texas got me a bottle of Penelope 18-year. Now, it's a light American whiskey, and I've not tried it yet because he still has it in Texas, and next time I see him, I'll get it. But I think that one is pushing 140. But I've not tried anything over the 132, 34 yet. And for me, 110 is probably like that sweet spot. But a higher proof does not mean that it's going to taste hotter or harsher than a lighter proof. Because again, it depends on a lot of factors of how that stuff was made. And I know other guys and gals who review and do those things, they've stated it. I state it regularly. How one bourbon may drink softer than the proof itself. When I did that blind taste test, a 90 proof versus a 108 proof, you could not tell the difference in how hot it was in the mouth because they were very well constructed bourbons. So when you have a very well constructed bourbon, it doesn't mean it's going to burn. Likewise, if it's not a very good or well constructed bourbon, a lower proof might actually burn a little more. And it could be just the ethanol itself, and again, how it was constructed. Like a barrel proof. Prime example, right? They come out of the barrel as they are. But it doesn't mean it's going to be hot. A barrel proof, cask strength, full proof, all of those. They're not interchangeable, but they all are typically a much higher proof, which doesn't mean they're hotter. And I know some of you will shy away from bottles like that because your palate may not like it hotter or a higher proof, but you can't let that be the judge. But because what I always say, especially if it's looking or you're looking for an expensive or a higher costing bottle, always go somewhere where you can find a pour and try it, or find a good friend like Jack from Bourbon Barrel Mafia who will let you try it before you go buy it. You're going to pay a lot for a pour, but it's going to be a lot less than it will be for a bottle that you end up not liking. Some people also think that a single barrel means it's better. Now, a lot, and I mean a lot of them are much, much better. But again, depends on how they're constructed. Okay. And a single barrel is exactly what it sounds like. Whatever that barrel is, however many bottles it is, those are the only ones from that barrel. And typically, that's where you get your best tasting bottles. Now, not all of them are the best because some distillers just don't make the best bourbon. But those bottles, they save those barrels Those are typically going to be in their better warehouses, right? They know which ones get the better weather conditions, the heat and humidity, and then the cold. Some of them, some warehouses, they control the climate, so it's climate controlled, so they can maintain consistency. Because what makes the bourbon better is age, and then the heat, humidity, and cold. And generally, you get the best of that when it's up in a higher level because the heat rises, so you get more humidity up there, and you get the cold as well. And that's what makes those typically better. But again, it depends on how it was made, the consistency, the balance, all the things that factor into that. And like I said, it doesn't always mean it's better, but damn, there's a lot of times where it is a lot better. And then a small batch. Well, small batch, when I first started, I started on a small batch. And for the longest time, I didn't know what it meant. I just thought, man, because you watch TV, the movies, they're like, oh, man, small batch. That's got to be really, really good because they just make a little bit. And so that's probably very, very concentrated, focused, like one of a kind of stuff. And it doesn't mean anything like that at all. So a small batch means that they've just picked these barrels, and it can be up to 200 barrels that they select. And I promise you, they're not picking the best ones from the best warehouse off the highest racks in the rick house or the warehouse. But they're taking all these barrels and then they're blending them together. So now I've had some very small batch. I did one with Milam and Green. If I'm not mistaken, they had like 19 barrels was what they used, which makes it very, when you consider it could be hundreds, less than 20 is very small. I recently did one. I can't remember which one it was specifically, but I think it had even less than 19 barrels blended together. And that is what makes a small batch. Now, they blend these much like, okay, let me back up. Just your everyday regular bourbon, right? It's actually blended as well, but you're talking thousands of barrels. And one of the reasons they do that is so when you go buy, if you're one of those diehard fans of pick a bottle, right? They want it to taste consistent for you every time. And by blending thousands of bottles or barrels, together, they can find that consistency. And then the small batch is just it's a step up because while it is still blended, it's just a lot fewer barrels, which makes it a little more exclusive. But there's not really a universal federal definition that says how many you can and can't have. So it basically comes down to the distiller. But small batches typically, for me, are very good because, again, it does have a different flavor because there aren't as many barrels involved in the blending of that particular one. I'm surprised, and again, I'm not making fun of anybody because most of this shit I had no idea really until the last couple of years when I started doing reviews and videos, and I didn't know shit. I would just drank bourbon, talked about whatever I knew. But now it forced me into doing some research again, because I will tell you my opinion, but I won't tell you my opinion as fact when I'm talking about facts. So, but non-distilling producers, right? I'm still surprised how many people assume that just because there's a name on a bottle that there's a distillery. And that's not the case. But it's not a bad thing. Here's how I would describe it to you. My buddies in Indiana, I've been there a couple times over the last couple months, where I was born and raised, and it's Mark and Mark. And if you don't know, my name is also Mark, but I go by Jack, which is a childhood nickname. I like the name, but in my friend group, I've got a shit ton of Marks. So that's why I go by Jack, because it gets really, really fucking confusing when 3 or 4 or 5 of us are together. Anyway, Mark and Mark. On my last trip, we were talking about, man, maybe we should just do our own bourbon, right? So there are distilleries out there that produce bourbon that they have no intention of marketing or labeling as their own. They literally make it for other people who do not have any plans of building a distillery and going through the years of the process that it takes. So Mark and Mark and Mark talked about, hey, let's start our own brand, The Marksman. And I've got some Mark friends here in Florida too, so there might be more of us. And Texas, but Felwalk spells his name with a C, so you have to have a K in your name. But anyway, so NDP. So if we were to start that, right, if we decided we're going to make our own bourbon, but we didn't want to buy it from someone else, so we have to get all of our ingredients, we have to build our distillery and go through that whole process, which is beautiful with the equipment and all that, all the employees. It'll be fantastic, providing jobs to everyone. And then someday, boom, we've got barrels of bourbon. But now our problem is we got to wait. We have to wait for years. I mean, right, it doesn't have to be 2 years unless we want it to be a straight bourbon. But I can promise you there aren't too many 2-year-old bourbons that a lot of people are fawning over to go get and buy and drink. Now, mind you, there may be some, but there's not a lot. Is realistically you need to wait 4 to 6 years, and if you really I mean, you could start selling it at 4 to 6, but man, the really good stuff is when you get 6 and beyond, 8-year, 10-year and beyond that, because those bottles usually dictate a higher price, because usually, not always, usually they're better, especially if you're going to do single barrels or cask strength or barrel proof. You want those things to have some age to them so they taste better, drive demand, earn more money per bottle. So an NDP is not necessarily a bad thing, but again, just because there's a name on the bottle doesn't mean that that company or that NDP, whatever. And usually it'll tell on the label where it came from. And what might shock you is there are a lot of very, very good bourbons, Kentucky bourbons, that are made in Indiana by Midwest Grain Products, MGP. They have a new name now, but I, being from Indiana, never knew that and just learned that last year. And I'm even more surprised by the number of bottles that I've purchased and tried and loved that were actually distilled by MGP, who makes it for the NDP. So that's why a lot of companies, they want to get into distilling, and maybe they go ahead and start, because not everybody's like, I don't want a distiller. There are some that are like, we're going to start distilling, and a lot of great ones start that way. Build your distillery, get all your infrastructure in place, do all that stuff, and start distilling. But then go out and you buy the barrels, quality barrels. You start marketing your brand. That way you have bourbon on the market. People are getting familiar with you while those babies are aging that you've distilled yourself. And then gradually, years have passed, and now your barrels have matured. In the meantime, you've been selling barrels that you bought, and then some of them start filtering in. They'll produce some of their own. They'll still keep doing the barrels they've purchased, and then as time goes on, maybe they continue to do that forever. Maybe they finally just start selling the stuff that they distill. But that is why there's an NDP, or there are NDPs, and that's why it's actually a good thing. So next time you get a bottle, check it, find out. It's some interesting stuff. It really is. So mash bills. So if you don't know, that's the recipe, right? We talked about it before. It has to be 51% corn, 49% other grains, right? Wheat, malted barley, rye. Some people think that mash bill tells you exactly what it's going to taste like. And it does matter a lot, okay? Because there could be some really good ones or really bad ones, depending on whatever the percentages of all of those grains are. But the yeast content also has a huge factor in that. So the yeast is what creates the fermentation. So it has a huge factor into it. So does the distillation process. So does the entry proof, how hot it is when it goes into the barrel. Are they good barrels? Are they quality barrels? Yeah, they have to be new white oak containers, barrels in this case. We're just going to say fucking barrels from here on out. And the only reason I even bring it up is one of my first videos I did a brief thing about this, and I said barrels, and somebody's like, it has to be a container. I'm like, what the fuck ever. I mean, 99.99% are barrels. So from here on out, it's barrels. And whoever the nerd was that sent me the container thing, I'm sorry, but it's fucking barrels. So the construction of those barrels, are they quality barrels? Are they not? How much were they charred? How little were they charred? Again, where the location of the warehouse is. Is it a shitty warehouse? Is it one of the better locations? You know, or is it up high where it's being stored? How did they blend it? All of those things, right? They play a factor in the taste. And once they blend it, when it's all said and done, who knows, right? You got some mediocre barrels, because again, they're not going to give the best stuff if they're blending it. That's reserved for the single barrels, but then they blend it, and that affects the flavor. And one of the beautiful things of blending is, you may not know, but when they blend bourbon, it's not always all the same age. And if it's age stated, it has to state the youngest age of the barrels. So oftentimes, say for instance, this 10-year or a 12-year, whatever the age is, there could actually be 11, 12, 14, 15, 12, whatever aged bourbon blended in with this. It's not to say there is, but it often happens. And you say, well, why the fuck would they do that? Because it's not always better. The older stuff is not always better. What if they had older barrels that weren't in the perfect climate or warehouse location and they knew it's just not worthy of a single barrel? They would blend it in there. So no matter how many older barrels were added, it has to be stated as the youngest aged barrel bourbon, not an average. That is interesting. You have to admit, that's interesting. Did you know that? Did anybody out there know that? If you did, tell me, but don't bullshit me, because most people don't know that. You have to look that shit up. Speaking of age, I've also been asked, so I know, and there's never a dumb question, right? One of my teachers, I don't know who it was, always said the only dumb question is the question that goes unasked. So there are no dumb questions. But I've been asked a lot, and I understand why people would ask it. Does bourbon age while it's in the bottle? Well, technically, I guess it's getting older, but it's not that the stated age doesn't get older like it would in the barrel. So you buy this 10-year and you hang on to it for 10 more years because you're like, now I got an Eagle Rare 20. Sorry, Bubba. It doesn't work that way. It will always be a 10-year aged bourbon. Now, your bottle will be older than that, but it doesn't continue to age in the bottle. Only in the barrel can it do that. I'm sorry, but that's a fact. So, yeah, there's just so many things that go on with it that it doesn't allow it to do that. But once it's opened, it just is what it is still. So this is a word to the wise. Now, I've never seen this happen, but it could. Because there are people, and some of you may know this person, some asshole on Facebook or whatever. He's trying to market a fucking 35-year-old bottle of Eagle Rare 10, right? Man, 35-year. That's got to be worth like $2,500 for this $40 bottle. It doesn't work that way. That's why you need to know. That bottle is still a 10-year bourbon. And so, what does all of this mean? Well, it doesn't mean you need to know mash bills. You don't need to know entry proofs, char levels, warehouse locations, rickhouse destinations. And that's the fucking point to this whole thing. Not only is it because I have fun doing this, I get to smoke and drink, talk to people, air out my grievances, talk about bourbon, which I absolutely love doing, and hopefully every now and then I say something that somebody's like, huh, shit, that was pretty cool. Thanks, Jack, or Mark, whatever your fucking name is. Now, the whole point of this thing is, it doesn't matter. Drink what you like, drink it the way you like. But, damn it, open the fucking bottle and drink it. And that's to you, hoarders and collectors. Open it and drink it with the people you like, because that's how it's meant to be experienced. So until next week, keep the pours in the glass, not on the shelf, and tune in for more After Hours. Cheers.